All righty, well, I have 3:30, so we will go ahead and get started. My name is Bethany Fillers, and I'm the Director of Professional Learning for Rural Life, and we are so excited to have you joining us for the Rural Life Strong Start Learning Series. All right, the Rural Life Project, in partnership with TNTP, is offering this four-part series of learning sessions to support our 6th through 8th grade ELA teachers in getting to know and best utilize their new curricular materials. Please do not hesitate to use the chat to ask questions or request technical support. If you're pretty new to Zoom, you should have a Zoom toolbar at the bottom of your Zoom window, or maybe at the top. And there you'll find your mic button where you can mute and unmute as needed. We just ask that you stay muted while the presentation is happening to cut down on background noise. Your video button is there as well, and we encourage you to turn that on so we can see your face. I know it's awkward, but we can all be awkward together. And then you'll also see your chat button down there, and we'll be doing several things in chat. Looks like a little speech bubble, so you can pop that up and be ready to add to our chat box throughout the session. Let's see. Yes, so we've got here on the slide that we are in the second of the four-part series, Close Reading in a Virtual Classroom. And then you can also see we have 2 other sessions coming up in October. We'll talk more about those at the end of our session. Next slide, Jetta. All right, so just real quickly, our intent behind the Strong Start Learning Series is to allow teachers a chance to explore a variety of high leverage literacy practices for both the virtual and in-person, or possibly a hybrid learning environment. More importantly, though, we want to connect key learning from these sessions to the actual materials we have in front of us. And in fact, we'll actually engage in 75 minutes of learning, and through that we'll collaborate, we'll do some reflection, we'll have some concrete planning, and that will include breakout groups based on your actual materials. So you'll get a chance to talk with other teachers who are using the same materials you are. At this time, I am so excited to introduce Dr. Jetta Donovan. She is our project director for our Strong Start series, and she will also be our partner for the Strong Start Network for those of you that are applying to be a part of that learning network. At this time, I'll hand it over to Jetta.
Thanks, Bethany, for that welcome.
It was quick.
It was quick. Yeah. As Bethany said, I'm a director at TNTP. Really excited to be working with you all for the next couple years as we launch this work and the Strong Start series. And I have been at TNTP 5 years now, supporting work, a lot of work around implementing new high quality literacy materials in different districts. I've worked in Nashville public schools the past 3 years, supporting them around their literacy curriculum implementation, and excited to bring that work to you all as well. Before I joined TNTP, I was a middle school English teacher and a reading specialist for about 7 years. And then I was an instructional coach for 3 years before joining TNTP. And I also got my doctorate in literacy during that time. So talking and working with teachers around strong literacy instruction is definitely my passion. So excited to be here with you all today. Today's session, as you saw, is really about close reading and how we're using close reading in this really challenging moment that we're in of virtual and hybrid and in-person and all of the above instruction. And so our objectives for today, we're going to we're going to do a little bit of context building about what we mean by close reading and the role that it plays in engaging students in rich and challenging text. And then we'll pivot a little bit to thinking about, okay, what does close reading then look like in a virtual space? And as Bethany mentioned, we'll spend some time reflecting on some of those best practices and what they can look like in your materials, and give you some time to plan for an upcoming lesson. So that is our rough objectives for today. And I've organized the session around some three basic questions here. So what is the role of close reading in providing students scaffolding to complex text? What are some of our best practices for facilitating close reading in a virtual classroom? And then how do I plan for close reading in my own virtual classroom? And we're going to start with this question of really what is the role and understanding the role of close reading. So I want to start with a little bit of context just about complex text before we jump into what we mean by close reading. So this is, I'm going to show you a data set put out by Metametrics, which is the organization that developed Lexile levels. So they are really, narrowly focused on the levels of complexity of text. And they did a study where they looked at the complexity of a range of text that students are likely to experience from high school to college and then career text. And I'll just show you here what the different complexity levels of these texts were. And you can see that, there is a big jump between high school and college literature and high school and college textbooks. That complexity level gets quite high of what students are expected to do. But I think that one of the important things I like to highlight in this data is the level of complexity of occupational text, of military text, of personal use text, of the SAT, right? There is a real level of complexity that students, whether they decide to go to college or they enter the military or they enter some other career path, vocational texts are going to be expected to be able to read at in order to access those texts to be engaged citizens and successful in their careers. And I emphasize this because, teachers at whatever level we're teaching at, whether we're teaching kids to read in kindergarten or first grade, or you're a middle school teacher, you are supporting students on this path to being able to access these complex texts. And if we don't give students access and opportunities to engage in these rich and challenging texts throughout their schooling experience, then by the time they make it to high school or college, they're going to be so far behind that it's going to be a real challenge for them to be able to access these texts at these levels. So that's a little bit of the why. I'm going to give you a second to read this quote. This is a quote by Dr. Timothy Shanahan, who's one of the best known researchers in reading instruction, and it's about the role of complex text and our standards. So just take a moment to look at the quote on the slide and read it. So the point that Dr. Shanahan is making here, I think, is a really important one, which is that in order for our students to meet grade level standards, they have to be addressing those standards at grade level text, right? I can teach students to find the central idea of green eggs and ham all day long, but that isn't a grade level text for my sixth grade students. And while I might be addressing the standard of sixth grade, if I'm not pairing that with a challenging text for sixth grade students, then we're not actually asking students to meet the bar of our sixth grade standards. And I think that's a really important point to make, that the standards alone, without that pairing of complex text to them, don't provide the students the challenge that our TN Ready standards expect of students. I will layer on one additional challenge. So if I've not set up the challenge big enough here yet around like what we're trying to accomplish with students, there's the added layer of challenge this year of our students have experienced a serious disruption to their education through the COVID pandemic and the shutdown of schools. NWEA, that puts out a lot of assessment data, released a study in the spring projecting out the learning loss they anticipated students having based on their assessment data of many years, and anticipated that students, based on where they had to, schooling was disrupted in the spring, expected a 30% learning loss in reading. And that just adds to, for students who are on track and on grade level, that's already a serious challenge, but for our I'm not going to leave you in a state of despair here. We don't want to just throw our students into the deep end of complex text, right? I'm not just going to throw them out there, especially if I have students who are struggling readers or who have been below grade level in past years, right? And especially in this virtual environment, I need to offer them a life preserver. In this case, our life preserver that we want to offer students is close reading. So my question for you all, before I say what I think, in my opinion, is why do you think I might refer to close reading as this life preserver for students? How does close reading scaffold and provide students access to richer, challenging text? So I want you to take a second and think about that. And then I would love for everybody to respond into the chat box, just your initial thoughts to that question. I'll read it one more time. So why is close reading our life preserver? How does close reading scaffold and provide students access to richer, challenging text? Drop your thoughts in the chat box. Okay, so I see some people calling out that it allows the teacher to model understanding the text. Michelle called out it allows students to analyze information at a deeper level rather than just skimming, which we know our students can often be prone to doing. Returning and revisiting the text with purpose. Great. Yeah, I feel like my answer to this would synthesize a lot of what you guys have shared here. I think there's sort of like two pieces where I think about close reading as in and of itself a scaffold for students. The first is, and a few people mentioned this, the teacher being able to, and teacher and peers, depending on how you're structuring your close read, being able to model looking deeply at a text to unpack its meaning, right? That's the level of thinking we need our students doing about text. And so they get an opportunity to see that made visible for them. But then I also think it's important to point out that when we do a close reading of a chunk of text, it allows you to unpack the meaning of that piece of text to understand some of the deeper meanings and central ideas of the text that they're reading. If it's a longer text like a novel or a short story that students are reading at more length, they start to understand, okay, what are some of those key ideas and central themes that are in this text that they can then carry with them as they move towards more independent reading of the text. So I think for both of those reasons, close reading is one of the most essential tools we have for giving students that access to close reading, to complex text. This is a definition from Park that defines what close reading is and looks like. I'll read the definition, but as I do, I want you to think about what is a word, phrase, group of words here that most resonates with you in capturing the definition of close reading. I'm going to ask you to type that into the chat box. So think about, as I read this, which words or phrases both best capture for you your own definition of close reading. So close analytic reading stresses engaging with a text of sufficient complexity directly and examining meaning thoroughly and methodically, encouraging students to read and reread deliberately, directing student attention on the text itself empowers students to understand the central ideas and key supporting details. It also enables students to reflect on the meanings of individual words and sentences, the order in which sentences unfold, and the development of ideas over the course of the text, which ultimately leads students to arrive at an understanding of the text as a whole. So go ahead and type in the chat box which words or phrases best capture your own vision or definition for close reading. A lot of people are calling out deliberately. I feel like that's what I fixate on here too, right? It's calling attention to the way that it's reading with purpose for students. A few people have called out the phrase of arriving at an understanding of the text. I think that's really important, right? That we do close reading. It's not just to like pull out interesting nuggets from the text we're reading, right? We're really doing it to build our bigger understanding of the text as a whole. Great. Okay, so let's move on. That sort of grounds us in why do we do close reading, right? We do close reading because we need to engage students in complex and challenging text because we know that's essential to their success in school and beyond. And we know that close reading can be in and of itself a scaffold to give our students access to those complex texts. Let's look now at what are some best practices for facilitating close reading in a virtual classroom. I'll say here before I jump into this, because I didn't say it earlier and I should have, that John very kindly put a link into materials for today's session, and there's a handout in there which you can refer to. So if you haven't pulled that up yet, take a minute and go ahead and do that, because we're going to refer to a reading. It'll be on the screen too, but I know some people prefer to have their own in front of them as well. Thanks, John. Okay, so I'm going to do a model here for you guys of a virtual close reading. There's a lot of different ways you can structure a virtual close reading. We're going to be doing a synchronous one here since you're all live with me in Zoom. But I've also seen a lot of really strong examples of teachers doing asynchronous versions as well, where they've recorded close readings. So we can talk more about some examples of that as well, but I'll be taking you through a model of that. I want you to think you're going to wear sort of two hats as we're doing this, right? You're going to be participating as a learner in the close reading, but I also want you to participate with your sort of metacognitive lens, thinking about what are the characteristics of an effective close read that helped me unlock and helps you as learners unlock the meaning of the text. And then secondly, what virtual learning tools am I using to engage you as a learner in this close reading? Okay. So we will jump in. We are going to read The New Colossus, a poem by Emma Lazarus. And I'm going to start and do the first reading aloud. So you can just follow along. It's on the slide here, so you can follow along here. If you want to follow along in your handouts, you can. And during this first read, you're just listening. If I call attention to any vocabulary, feel free to underline or circle, whatever you need to do to help you along the way. Okay. The New Colossus by Emma Lazarus. Not like the brazen giant of Greek fame. I'll just note here that brazen means shameless, without shame. Not like the brazen giant of Greek fame, with conquering limbs astride from land to land. Here at our sea-washed sunset gates shall stand a mighty woman with a torch, whose flame is the imprisoned lightning, and her name, Mother of Exiles. Exiles means people banished from their land. From her beacon hand glows worldwide welcome. Her mild eyes command the air-bridged harbor that twin cities frame. Keep ancient lands. Keep ancient lands, your storied pomp, cries she. Storied pomp means like celebrated, magnificent, so something very magnificent. With silent lips, give me your tired, your poor, your huddled masses yearning to breathe free. the wretched refuse of your teeming shore. Send these, the homeless, tempest-tossed, to me. I lift my lamp beside the golden door. Okay, I'm going to ask you now, you're going to read the poem again on your own. And as you read through the poem silently on your own, I'm going to ask you to jot down the rhyme scheme. So any lines that rhyme, you'll mark with the same letter, right? So fame and flame would both be marked with the letter A to jot down my rhyme scheme. So take 2 minutes, read through the poem and jot down what you think the rhyme scheme is. And then we're going to respond in a poll with what we think the rhyme scheme is. So take 2 minutes and do that. Okay, as you're finishing up your rhyme scheme, I am going to grab the link for us for our poll. So we've got a multiple choice question here about what you think is the correct rhyme scheme for the new Colossus. So go to that and you can enter your response. Okay, so it looks like we have a lot of consensus around option B. That is the correct answer for the rhyme scheme of the new Colossus. I'll just highlight that here. So good job applying your knowledge of rhyme scheme there. One thing I will highlight that the rhyme scheme tells us about the structure of this poem is that it's actually an Italian sonnet. And it's important to know that in the structure of an Italian sonnet, the first 8 lines, as you can see, they have got a common rhyme scheme relationship set up the last 6 lines of the poem. And so there's usually some shift in focus or shift in meaning in the Italian sonnet between those first 8 lines and the last 6. So you identifying that rhyme scheme is really important to understanding the structure of this poem. Um, so if we know that if there's this shift in meaning, my question for you guys that I want you to type into the chat box is, what do you think is that shift in focus? So what is the focus of that first 8 lines versus this second 6 lines here that we notice in a shift in meaning? So what do you think is that shift in meaning between the first 8 lines and the last 6? And I'm going to have you type your responses in the chat box. Okay, Kara called out a change of emotion. Crystal called out there's dialogue in the second section. There isn't in the first. That's great. Change from description to quotes. A lot of people are calling out dialogue. Change in viewpoint, Christy calls out. Okay, great. So we notice that there is this shift in focus and shift in meaning. We're going to go to breakout rooms in just a second. You're going to get 3 minutes in your breakout rooms. And I want you to talk about the comparison of the 2 statues, right? In the first 8 lines of the poem, how is the statue described in the first 8 lines of the poem, and how is the second statue described in the last 6 lines of the poem? What comparisons and contrasts are made? So, and I encourage you guys in your breakout rooms to pick out specific language. So pick out different words that describe the 2 statues. I'll give you a second. Let's take a minute to think about that. And John's going to put us in breakout rooms. Keep your hand out in front of you because you won't be able to see the slide of the poem when you go into your breakout room.
Okay, here we go.
Thanks, John.
Okay.
John, do we have some folks who didn't enter their breakout room? Okay. John, were you saying something to me? You were on mute. I wasn't sure.
Yeah, there's several who have just been on but have never chatted or done anything.
Okay.
One of them even has my name on it there, Bethany, if you'll notice.
Oh, yes.
I've asked them to rename or let me know what the name should be, and they never have. So I don't know if they're just listening or what. I don't know.
Either way.
But everybody else is in. And I have them broken out right now by ELA. So there's about 3 to 4 in a room, roughly. Okay.
The person who has the name John Payne, I noticed you added something to the chat. Do you want us to rename you? And if so, you can drop it in the chat and I'll rename you.
Sure. We just need to know your name so we can put you in. Okay. Leanne. She's in a breakout room. Jordan Williams. Okay. There we go. Damn.
Yay, that's easy. Thanks, Jordan.
All right. Now, Jordan, let me assign you to number 3. Okay. There we go. Just click on the screen and it will take you into that breakout room. There we go. And I'll need to find out what Jordan is using.
He has Amplify.
Amplify, thank you.
John, are we bringing them back?
Yeah, you ready to?
Let's do it.
Okay, here we go. They'll be back in 1 minute.
Great. Welcome back. Welcome back. Welcome back, everybody. I would love to hear from 1 or 2 groups what you talked about. What specific contrast did you notice between the 2 statues in the first 8 lines versus the last 6 lines? And especially, are there particular words that stood out to you that contrasted the 2 statues? So anyone, feel free to unmute yourself and share some of what you discussed in your group.
Okay, I don't. Sorry. Okay, thank you. Sorry, we were getting some feedback and echo here. So in our group, we talked about how there's such a contrast between the statue, the Greek statue versus the Statue of Liberty. So we didn't really see any comparison, but more of a contrast. So he's described in the first 2 lines as a brazen giant with conquering limbs, whereas she's described as having mild eyes, and that air-bridged harbor is more welcoming and not as intimidating as the Colossus statue would be.
Beautiful. Anyone else want to add something else you talked about in your group?
Jetta, we talked a little bit about the change in tone, the author's tone and, the speaker's tone. It kind of leads you right into where you want to be for the last couple lines. So
Great. There is a big shift there. And I think Virginia, your name's Virginia, right? Great. Virginia called out some of the specific language that I think really reflects that change in tone. So we see the first statue as brazen or shameless versus the mild-mannered statue in the last section. We do see this contrast of the Greek statue of Colossus versus this statue being referred to as our statue, right? The Statue of Liberty in America. And then to me, a really powerful contrast is that conquering language versus a worldwide welcome, right? It sets a big shift in the terms of what these statues represent, right? A conquering statue versus a welcoming statue, a worldwide welcome. Okay, good. So with all of that in mind that you have now thought about with your peers, I'm going to ask you to respond independently now and think about what does the second statue, who does the second statue welcome to the shores of America, and how is the land, or how is America characterized in those last 6 lines? And we're going to do this via Padlet. So as you guys are thinking about your response to that question, I will put in the link to the Padlet for you.
I don't know what that is.
So there's our link to the Padlet. And I will put the poem back up and the question back up. So who does the second statue welcome to the shores of America? And you can use exact language or quotes from the text to answer that, or your own summary. And then how is America characterized in those last few lines? So take a second. I'll give you guys 2 minutes to respond in the Padlet, and then we'll come back together. Okay, we are going to come back together now, and I will sort of time out from our close reading model there. This was an abbreviated version. I skipped through some questions I would normally use with students, but wanted to give you a sample of what that close reading process might look like using some virtual tools. And so let's debrief that model a bit now. So I want to take a second and think about the 2 questions I gave you to think about as you were experiencing this model of a close read. So the first is, what are the characteristics of an effective close read that you saw me using here to help unlock the meaning of the text? And then the second lens of, what were some of the virtual learning tools that we use to engage in this close reading? So take a minute and you can either jot down in your handouts or on a piece of paper, jot down your responses to this question. And then we can, I'm going to ask a few people to unmute and share your thoughts with me. So take a minute and think. Okay, so I would love to hear from a few of you and answer either of these questions. So what were some characteristics of an effective close read that you saw me using here to unlock the meaning of the text? Or what were some virtual learning tools that we used to engage in this close reading?
Jetta, we had an opportunity to share our thoughts with other people. It was empowering.
Great. So in this close reading, we used both some modeling from me of my thinking, but you also got to hear from your peers and see some of your peers writing about the text as well. Great. Great. Tina points out that I provided some scaffolds around unknown vocabulary during our first read. Okay, great. So I see people calling out some of the different virtual tools, and we can come back to these in a moment, but I'll just note that the Padlet allows for everybody to respond in writing about the text, an opportunity to write about the text, but to do so in a low stakes way, right? Where everybody get to show your peers what you know about the text, but you can do so anonymously, right? So that provides some accountability and lowers the pressure around the writing task. Similarly with the poll, Brooke pointed out it's a low stakes response. It is accountability, right, for getting the right answer and understanding the correct answer of the text, but it's low stakes in that you get to see what everyone in your class or group thought. Great.
Hey, Jetta.
Yes, ma'am.
Something that stood out to me was the way you utilized the rhyme scheme, or the way you walked us through kind of a conversation about that, because it could have been a very skill-driven conversation, like what's the rhyme scheme, focus on the letters, let's look at some other poems and practice putting the letters down, you know, that kind of thing. But there you shifted my thinking as a participant to beyond just the AA, you know, BBCD thing to, oh, it's an Italian sonnet. And it's very purposeful in that it shifts the focus from what I see in the A and B structure to what I see in the C and D structure. And that helped me realize that there is a shift. And that was a setup for some other questions you asked about what shifts I would see in vocabulary or just in the tone, so on and so on.
Beautiful. Bethany, you're not my plant, but that is that was exactly. Yeah, I think that's really important to call out that the question about rhyme scheme did a couple of things. One, it put your attention onto the structure of the poem and some of the structural elements of it. But I also gave you that question with your own reread of the poem. So it forced you back into the text and asked you to reread it with that lens and with that purpose of understanding the structure of the poem. And it was that sequence of questions was purposeful, right? That the structure of the poem, understanding the structure of that poem is essential to understanding the overall meaning of the poem. And so that was important that we start there. But it's also an accessible question that everybody can answer without, even if you haven't yet unpacked what you think the bigger key idea of the poem is. So great point. I'll highlight a couple other things. So the questions here are sequenced to push students towards deeper understanding of the text and support them in getting there, right? By sort of scaffolding these questions along the way. I didn't start with this bigger question about what do we think this represents about America or about this statue, right? We start with some questions that are more accessible. The questions provide support, things to pay attention to, some bite-size analysis before we get into that big, more central idea question. In order to do this, we all need to have read the poem, thought deeply about the text, identified what is that central idea that I'm trying to get students to understand, and then what are the questions I have to ask for students to access that. Some of the virtual reflections here that I made sure to incorporate, so a shared screen of the text, even if we're doing this synchronously or asynchronously, right? That's an important part. Annotations to model active close reading. I used a variety of virtual tools that you guys already called out, the chat box, polling, breakout rooms, Padlet, so different ways to hold students accountable and for them to engage in their own thinking about the text. Utilize the polling structure and Padlet for accountability for the students and for engagement. So you saw me model some of these things, but I want to give you also, this is in your handouts as well. And feel free to, Padlet's now sending me all these alerts about your responses, sorry. Feel free to, as I'm going through these, highlight any of these that you feel particularly that you'd like to use or would like to use more frequently in your close reading with students. So the first is guided notes, and I've put an asterisk next to any of these tools that could be both used for synchronous or asynchronous recordings of close reading. So providing, one thing I didn't do here that I could have done is providing guided notes where as you're reading the poem, there's particular questions that you're filling in responses to. I think this can be particularly helpful in an asynchronous recording. Or if I'm doing a think aloud model of a close read. Google Classroom discussion board. So if I've recorded an asynchronous close read, a place for students to respond and share their thinking with peers and writing before coming to a synchronous session. So Flipgrid, having students post videos to share their thinking about the text and being able to do that orally through videos. Polling, as you saw me use here, a quick formative assessment to gauge the student understanding. If I'd done that poll and the rhyme scheme piece had been all over the place, then I would have known, okay, I need to pause and model for students how to figure out that rhyme scheme. The chat box, using a quick way to engage students, but to do so in writing about the text. Breakout rooms, so that opportunity for small group and partner discussion. Zoom screen share, so if I was recording an asynchronous close reading, I could still use Zoom and record my close read here so that students could have the visual of the text up. Padlet, used in exactly the way we used it here today, which is a collaborative writing space where students can share their independent thinking and respond to peers. Google Docs, so if you want students doing some collaborative writing or even submitting writing about their close reading into Google Classroom, that's a great place to do it. And then lastly, Google Forms, so having a quick formative assessment at the end of a close read for students to share their thinking about the text after the close read. So a few different ideas about different virtual tools we might use. And you saw me use some of these in the model, so you got to see an example of those things. So I want you to keep these in mind because we're going to transition now to how do I plan for close reading in my own virtual classroom. And I want you to think about from this list, what are some of these strategies that I either want to use more frequently in my close reading or want to try out. I'm going to show you a quick model from my perspectives. This is a close reading example from grade 6. Students are reading Jacqueline Woodson's Brown Girl Dreaming in this unit, and we have a close reading here. This is also in your handout so you can follow along. And I'm just going to show you briefly how I thought about this close reading. Already gives me a lot of the thinking and great questions that I would want to share in a close read. So my job as a teacher who's translating this to a virtual classroom is to think about how do I restructure this, reorganize this, give students avenues to engage with this in our virtual classroom. So I'm going to show you a little bit of a model of how I would do that, and then you're going to get to go to breakout rooms and do this for yourself for your upcoming lessons. So the two things I'm thinking about is what is the goal of this close read? What is we want students to understand about the central themes of this text? And then what strategies and tools could I use to modify this close read for my virtual classroom? And I will highlight a few things that I would do here. So the central theme of this particular part of the text that we're doing the close read of that we want students to walk away from is that Woodson has a creative imagination, but she often uses it to compensate for and hide from challenges in her life. And so that's the takeaway that this close read is building up students to understand. You'll notice that in the teacher's guide here for my perspectives, it gives some questions and conclusions we would want students to arrive at. So my plan was for this question to use the chat box so that students can share their thinking, and I can highlight some model responses. You'll notice I did that with you all as well. As you're putting things into the chat box, I'm narrating some of the model responses that I want to make sure are highlighted to unpack the meaning of the text. And then this conclusion question around how does this dialogue help you understand the differences between Woodson and her sister? I might have students do a quick Google Doc collaborating together with a T-chart comparing Woodson and her sister, right? So a space for students to demonstrate their understanding of that question. At the end of this close read, there's a comprehension check. So a quick way for me to translate that is to put it into a Google form for a quick formative assessment. So students can respond to those questions independently. And I can also gauge what level of understanding they had about the text. And then lastly here, there's a question around writing a mini summary of each poem in the excerpt from Brown Girl Dreaming. This is their writing task here at the end. And I might, after they do this, send students to breakout rooms with a shared Google Doc. Each group takes one excerpt and writes a collaborative summary. So again, trying to maximize opportunities for students to collaborate with one another when they're in their synchronous sessions. Great. Bethany raised a really good question about not showing the responses as the poll results come in. That's the exact thing I thought about as I was showing that today. I would definitely not show the responses as they come in, because then everybody picks what's the most common one. So good point. Okay, so that is a quick model. You see, all I did there was, and all of the adopted materials that you guys have your districts have selected have some version of close reading as a part of them, and structure it in slightly different ways, but there's similar models in all of your materials. And they give you, the rich complex text that you're using and the questions and scaffolding to provide students. But in this moment of a hybrid and virtual world, they don't necessarily give you, how do I translate that to my virtual classroom? And so that's what we're going to spend some time doing in our groups. So you're going to have 15 minutes in your group. And what I'd love for you to do, we asked everybody to bring a lesson that had a close read as a part of it, so that you can plan for an upcoming lesson that has a close reading. I've also included in your handouts a sample My Perspectives and Amplify lesson with close reading, so that if you didn't bring one, you have something to refer to for those folks who are using those materials. But you should go through this process in your breakout rooms. So first, unpack the close read. So think about in your upcoming lesson, what is the goal of this close read? How does it connect to the goals of the unit? What should students understand about the meaning of the text after this close reading? So that's really you just understanding what is the purpose of this close reading. And then focus on what are the virtual strategies I'm going to use. So going through that same process that I just modeled for you, of figuring out, okay, here I want to use the chat box, here's a good polling feature, or, I'd like to record this asynchronously as well. You guys will have 15 minutes and then we will come back together. This planning protocol is in your handouts as well, so you can follow along there because you won't be able to see the slide. Questions before we go? Okay, John, our breakout room wizard, is going to put us in. So you'll think.
Bethany, our room was a lot of fun. We had a lot of fun in our room.
My room was better. No, I'm just kidding. Everybody can say that. I bet all the rooms were great. No doubt.
Okay.
It's just fun to say stuff like that.
I'm just seeing if you're awake.
I'm here.
I love to see a pair of people. I just saw two people in one room, and that.
Oh, I didn't know we were going to another breakout room. Are we in the main room?
Oh, is this
We're in the main room now, Kara.
Oh, because
Back in the main room.
Few people in here, so I was like, okay, I'll talk more. Sorry, okay, I'll unmute myself now. Bye.
You're all over there doing the assignment and everything.
Oh, Jetta, I can't hear you. I see your, no, I see your mouth moving, but can't hear you. Oh. Nope. Nope, can't hear you, Jetta. May have to pop you out and pop you back in.
Yeah, leave and come back. Just leave and come back. Well, hold on. Just leave and come back.
While she's doing that, I was so excited by the conversation the breakout room I was in was having. And also I noticed that I think several of us on here are maybe with a partner. So maybe I only see one Zoom box, but maybe you and your colleagues are together. So I just think that's fantastic, and what a wonderful way to kind of join together as we engage in this type of learning. All right, while Jetta is maybe figuring out what's happening with her sound, let's go to, oh, is there a chat we want to do, Jetta? Oh, I lost the slides. All right, hold on. Hey, this is how it works, right? It's just part of it. I would love for us to respond in the chat with, if I can just find it. Let me see here. Thanks for being patient.
Bethany, I can type the closing prompts in the chat if that works for you guys.
Perfect, thank you.
No problem.
And I'll find it here. Okay, so here they are. One thing I learned today, so you could respond to that prompt. One thing I'm energized by, or one thing I'm committing to do. One thing I learned, one thing I'm energized by, or one thing I'm committing to do. Thank you, Lindsay.
Can you guys hear me now?
We can.
Okay, I'm back. Thank you. I saw you talking and jumping in, Bethany, so thank you.
And we put the prompts in the chat too, so if anyone needs them.
Great, thank you.
Folks are thinking about what they're going to say in response to one of those prompts. I'm energized just by reading the chat. I love seeing what everybody's thinking about trying, what you're energized by. Now, don't overcommit. I know how we people are. We're like, oh, I'm going to commit to doing those 5 things tomorrow, right? Try one thing, see how it goes, reflect on it, maybe try it again. We'll just take it each step at a time.
I agree.
Go ahead. Let's say, do you want to add to this?
I was going to say the same thing I said during our session last week, which is I think the most important thing you can do is pick one thing you want to try and implement, and try that this week. Get it started immediately so that you don't lose it. And then once you feel comfortable with that, you can move on to the next thing, right? Don't bite off too much. But it's really nice to see everyone so energized and excited. We really appreciate you guys making time at the end of a long work day. I know that's hard, and being such thoughtful participants. So thank you all. Bethany, what's on the horizon?
Yeah, so we would love to see everyone back, and bring your friends, right, to our next session, which is October the 7th. Oh, and what a topic. Developing writers in a virtual classroom. And again, like we said at the beginning of this session, while it does say virtual classroom, strategies that we will kind of look at and pull apart and think about could apply to any learning setting, so in-person, virtual, or hybrid. And then on the horizon is fluency and volume of reading for October 21st. All right, thank you to John. If everybody would take just a minute here to take our survey, it's really, really valuable information for us. As much as I could when I developed it, I tried to make sure it was mostly stuff you could just check a box. There are a couple open-ended questions, so any feedback or thoughts about future sessions, we would love for you to share those. And at this time, Jetta, do you want to share your contact information? We can get that up on the screen as folks are pulling up that evaluation, and we'll get this thing wrapped up.
Yep, here's my email address. So feel free to reach out if you've got questions.
And someone had a question about certificates for these sessions. We may wait and kind of batch add them all together. That way, if folks attend more than one, we can just send them to you kind of in a little batch. We'll come up with some way to get them to you. But thank you for asking about that. All right, well, you have a good rest of your evening, everyone. And after you've completed the evaluation, if you don't mind, you can sign on out, and we hope to see you October 7th for the next session.
Thanks, everyone.
We'll hang around if anybody has any questions.